Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Part 3 of our Mid-Mod Arkansas Fort Smith virtual tour. The Mid-Mod Arkansas Tour series was created to increase appreciation of Arkansas's unique mid-century modern architecture. Tonight we will be featuring the Oscar Chambers House in Fort Smith. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, MAHG Architecture, as well as Propak Corporation and Arvest Bank for their generous support of this program. The Oscar Chambers House was designed in 1962 and 63 by Fayetteville architect Ernie Jacks. With inspiration from his mentors, who happen to be some of the country's most well-known mid-century architects, Ernie Jacks designed a truly remarkable home for Oscar and Joe Chambers. The house was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 2016. During the video premiere, Mason Toms, Callie Williams, and I will be monitoring the comments, so please feel free to ask questions and give us feedback on the tour. To learn more about Preserve Arkansas, visit our website at preservearkansas.org and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The Oscar Chambers House sits on an oversized lot in the middle of a picturesque neighborhood in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Completed in 1964 and designed by Fayetteville architect Ernie Jacks, the Chambers House is a remarkable and unique example of mid-century modern residential design in Arkansas. It was constructed for Oscar E. and Lena Jo Chambers for their property on lots 29 through 32 of Block C in the Druid Hills Estates subdivision. Oscar Elmer Chambers was born on October 11, 1914, to parents Oscar Carlisle Chambers and Alaska Lee Crane Chambers in Dallas County, Texas. The Chambers family owned a lumber company in Garland, Texas, just outside of Dallas, which Oscar went to work for after graduating high school. It was there that he met his future wife, Lena Jo Bryant. Bryant was the daughter of Joseph and Maggie Bryant and was the youngest of 6 children. After graduating high school, Bryant attended secretarial school, determined to make a better life for herself. Although her first job was in a manufacturing plant in Garland, she soon took an inventory clerk position at the Chambers Lumber Company. Oscar and Joe, as she was known to her friends, were married in 1953. The couple would go on to have 5 children together. Additionally, the couple would engage in a number of business enterprises over the years, including oil, lumber, motels, and home building. In the early 1960s, the family moved to Fort Smith, Arkansas, where Oscar started an insurance company as well as the Druid Hills Development Company, which had its offices at 1622 North A Street in Fort Smith. After purchasing a substantial amount of land on the south side of the city, Chambers hired Dallas engineer H. Lew Horn, Jr. to design the plat for the neighborhood. Oscar and Joe picked out 5 prime lots for the construction of their own home. They would subsequently sell one of the lots to a neighbor. In late 1962, they hired architect Ernie Jacks to design a new home for their family on the remaining 4 plots. Ernest Eugene Jacks, Jr. was born in Memphis, Tennessee on December 14, 1925, but was raised in West Memphis, Arkansas. After graduating from high school, Jacks enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1944, serving as a Naval Aviation Radar Technician, Petty Officer First Class. He was discharged from the Navy in 1946, following the end of World War II, after which he moved to Jonesboro to attend the Arkansas State College, now ASU. It was here that he met and married Nita Allen. In 1947, the young couple moved to Fayetteville, where Jacks enrolled in the recently created architecture program in the engineering college at the University of Arkansas. 3 years later, in 1950, he graduated as one of the first 5 students to complete the curriculum, alongside Faye Jones, Bob Laser, Woody Knight, and Joseph Wilkinson. After graduating, Jacks went to work as a draftsman in the Little Rock offices of Erhardt, Eichenbaum, and Rausch as the personal liaison and representative of famed modernist Edward Durell Stone on the University of Arkansas Medical School project in Little Rock. However, Jacks was recalled to naval service in 1951 due to the Korean War. He was stationed initially at Kodiak Island, Alaska, as a structural draftsman first class, but was later reassigned to Coronado Island, California. He was again discharged in 1952 and was offered a position in the offices of famed modernist Richard Neutra. However, Jacks did not really care for Neutra's work. Instead, he went to work in the office of notable structural modernist Craig Ellwood. During his brief time in Ellwood's office, he was able to work on several prominent projects produced by the office, including the Case Study House No. 16 in Bel Air and the Case Study House No. 17 in Beverly Hills. He was also the lead architect on the 1953 Jerry and Charles Bobberts house in San Diego. In 1953, Ernie and his wife, Nita, moved to Norman, Oklahoma, where he enrolled in the Graduate Studies program at the University of Oklahoma under Bruce Goff. He graduated in 1954, and the couple then moved to Little Rock, where he went to work again in the office of Erhardt, Eichenbaum, and Rausch. In that position, he continued working on the UAMS project, but also worked on the designs of Horace Mann High School in Little Rock and the Little Rock Air Force Base. In 1955, the Jacks family moved back to Fayetteville, where Ernie operated a satellite office for Edward Durell Stone until 1959. During this time, Jacks would routinely make trips to Stone's Palo Alto office to supervise the Stanford Medical Center project, but he always returned to the Fayetteville office, where he supervised the design and construction of the J. Lewis House in McGee, Carlson Terrace Married Student Housing in Fayetteville, and a proposed but never constructed design for the Alpha Gamma Rho Fraternity House. When the Fayetteville office closed, Jacks and his family moved to New York, where he worked in Stone's main office. There he worked on an early version of the Kennedy Performing Arts Center in Washington, D.C., and the North Carolina Legislative Capitol and House of Representatives in Raleigh, North Carolina. In the spring of 1961, Jacks left the Stone firm to work in the notable offices of Holloway Reeves in Raleigh, North Carolina, who had collaborated on several projects with the Stone firm, including the North Carolina Legislative Council and House of Representatives. By late 1961, Jacks had returned to Fayetteville because John G. Williams had offered him a teaching position. From 1961 until he retired in 1995, Ernie taught architecture classes at the University of Arkansas. He would eventually serve as assistant dean of the architecture school from 1976 until 1979, and then associate dean from 1979 until 1989. It was after Jacks returned to Fayetteville in 1961 that he opened and operated a small but significant practice in northwest Arkansas. In 1962 and 63, he was commissioned to design the home of Oscar Chambers in Fort Smith, and in 1964 and 65, he was commissioned to design a house for Dr. James Patrick in Fayetteville. He also teamed up with Fayetteville architect and fellow U of A architecture program grad Warren Seagraves to design the Boone County Medical Complex in Harrison, Hillcrest Tower in Fayetteville, and St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Fayetteville. Other projects that he is associated with include the Ozark Folk Center in Mountain View, Bank of Mountain View, Willow Heights Housing Complex in Fayetteville, and the remodel and expansion of the 1951 Fine Arts Center at the University of Arkansas at Monticello by Bruce Anderson. It is unclear how Jacks landed the commission for the Chambers House, although it may have come about through Fay Jones, who designed several buildings in the Fort Smith area during the 1960s. It may have also come from connections that his first architectural teacher and mentor, John G. Williams, had, as Williams was from the area. Whichever the case, the house that Jacks would create for the Chambers family had to respond to not only the needs of a family that size, but also fit onto a long, steeply sloping site. Drawing largely from his education and experience, Jacks would create a design that combined elements from the various sources and architects that he had encountered in his life. The resulting structure, though inspired by the work of others, was a wholly unique and remarkable example of mid-century modern residential design. The most significant and apparent influence on the design of the Chambers House came from the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. This was likely due to the fact that Wrightian architectural ideology was used as the primary basis for the curriculum in the University of Arkansas architecture program when John G. Williams, who was a lifelong proponent of Wright's design philosophy, created it in 1947. Additionally, Jacks, along with his classmates, had the opportunity to meet Mr. Wright at an AIA convention in Houston, Texas in 1949. In keeping with the Wrightian philosophy, Jacks designed the house so that it was, quote, small in scale and, quote, minimalist in its design, meaning that the design did not interrupt the view of the landscape or look to be out of place within the neighborhood of more moderate-sized houses. As Wright said in his 1908 essay entitled In the Cause of Architecture, quote, a building should appear to grow easily from its site and be shaped to harmonize with its surroundings. Hence, gently sloping roofs, low proportions, quiet skylines, suppressed heavy-set chimneys and sheltering overhangs, low terraces, and outreaching walls sequestering private gardens. Many of these traits are clearly demonstrated in Jacks' design. The house is capped with shallow, pitched, hipped, and gabled roofs, and it seems to hug the ground and is stretched out across it, opposed to abruptly jutting out of it. It is accented by multiple monolithic but suppressed chimneys, and it is wrapped in generously deep overhangs around the entire house. It is also surrounded by a number of semi-enclosed private terraces. In many ways, it would be easy enough to ascribe the origin of the entire design to Wright's teachings, as it seems to follow Wright's ideas to a T. However, there were also other influences from Jacks' previous professional associations that are visible in the architecture of the house upon closer examination. The design of the Chambers House incorporated several large, floor-to-ceiling spans of glass, as well as numerous pairs of large sliding glass doors to foster interaction between the indoors and the outdoors and blur the threshold between them. Though Wright preached the importance of doing this in residential architecture, the way in which Jacks did it was clearly inspired by the work he did while with the Elwood firm in California. This is seen in the entire walls of the house that are composed of little more than glass. Additionally, the exterior of the house displays a steel frame skeleton, like the form that Elwood was most known for using. A further influence from Elwood is seen in the window placements in the house. On the two sides facing the streets, the windows are generally tall, narrow openings with frosted or colored glass to provide the maximum amount of privacy. However, the other walls of the house that face into the property are almost entirely composed of clear glass to take in the landscape and provide a feeling of openness. This too was a common practice in Elwood's designs, which were often mostly glazed on the exterior, but were also often placed within a suburban neighborhood setting. The Chambers House also displays a great deal of influence from Jacks' time with Ed Stone. The plain monolithic chimneys and interior room arrangements echo Stone's designs for the 1948 Felix Smart House in Pine Bluff and the 1948 design for the Willis Noll House in Fayetteville. Additionally, the house contains few hallways, as Stone despised them. In the main body of the house, there are no hallways at all. The living, dining, and workspaces all flow from one into the other without interruption. In the children's bedroom wing, where a hallway was necessary, Jacks made the corridor extra wide and incorporated a series of cabinets beneath the long ribbon of windows, which brought utility and function to a space that would have otherwise served no purpose other than transit. Additionally, the pavilion design, used in the formal living room, echoed a similar architectural idea seen in Stone's 1958 Celanese House in New Canaan, Connecticut, 1959 Paterno House in North Salem, New York, and 1960 North Carolina State Legislature Building in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aside from the overall architectural concepts that formed the general idea of the house, Jacks used input from the Chambers family on what they would specifically need or want in their new home. There was an abundant amount of storage throughout the house for Joe Chambers, a large library off the master bedroom for Oscar, the book lover, and a large rumpus room and two-story playhouse for the children. However, Jacks said that Oscar and Joe Chambers were very hands-off during the process. They gave instructions to Jacks on what they wanted, and then sent a check when work was done. Jacks later remarked that they were the ideal clients. Construction of the house began in 1963 and was completed the following year in 1964 at the cost of roughly $120,000, which would be about $993,000 today. The builder of the house was Clyde Cobb, who lived in Oklahoma, but was well known in the Fort Smith area for residential construction. The materials used for the house included western red cedar siding, walnut trim, and local Fort Smith brick. The interior featured all the latest in-home conveniences, including double ovens and an indoor grill in the kitchen, spacious modern bathrooms, and scores of custom built-ins. Not long after the Chambers family moved into the house in mid-1964, Oscar's local insurance business was forced to close. Since Druid Hill Estates was just getting started, it was not producing any returns on the investment yet. So without the stream of income from the insurance business, the family could not afford to remain in the house. Oscar, Joe, and their 5 children returned to Texas only 8 months after moving into the house. Reportedly, upon their departure, Oscar and Joe donated the house to their church. The house sat mostly vacant from 1965 until 1969. However, during that time, Reverend Bill Barbary Sr. lived in the house for a period. Barbary had been the pastor of their church and a close family friend. Also, Bill England, who owned the Goldman Hotel in downtown Fort Smith, also lived in the house for a period after the bank repossessed it. It is not known for certain how he managed this, but it was rumored that he had a friend who was a higher up at the bank that owned the house. In 1969, Dr. Edwin and LaDonna Kaufman were thinking about building a new house for their growing family. Edwin grew up at Fort Smith, but he was actually born in Paris, Arkansas in 1932. After graduating from Fort Smith High School in 1950, he attended college at the University of Arkansas and later at the University of Arkansas Medical School, where he graduated in 1957. He later joined the United States Air Force. During this time, he met and married LaDonna Hale Kaufman. LaDonna was born in Clinton, Arkansas on June 2, 1934. After graduating high school, she went on to pursue a career in nursing, which is how she met Edwin. Edwin and LaDonna returned to Edwin's hometown of Fort Smith in 1962. By 1966, they were a family of 5 and were in need of a larger home. The couple initially wanted to build a new house. However, a sudden and dramatic increase in the cost of building materials put an end to that dream. They had only been approved for a $60,000 loan, but the construction estimate for the house they wanted surpassed that. Soon afterwards, the bank that held the title for the Chambers house decided they would reduce the price for the home. As luck would have it, Dr. Kaufman's cousin was a lawyer for that bank. When he heard that the price had been lowered, he suggested that Edwin and LaDonna look at the house. LaDonna immediately fell in love with the house, and Edwin loved LaDonna. Seeing that there was no way possible for them to ever build a house of the same quality, either in design or materials, the Kaufmans decided to make an offer on the house. It was accepted, and the Kaufmans moved into the house later that year. Edwin and LaDonna raised their 3 children in the house. The family loved living in such a beautifully designed residence and could never imagine living anywhere else. LaDonna passed away in 2007 after living in the house for 38 years. Edwin continued to live in the house for another 8 years until his health and mobility no longer allowed it. It was sold to the current owners in late 2015. They have performed some much-needed repairs, but have sought to preserve the beauty and simplicity of the home's original design. They are true lovers of mid-century modern design and have even filled the house with period furnishings. Today, the Chambers house is still just as stunning as it was when it was first completed 56 years ago.